Hello, everybody. Let's see if I'm actually live. It takes a few seconds to connect. I just want to make sure you guys can see me and hear me okay. Okay. It takes a few seconds to connect. Okay, I can see myself on the phone. So, welcome everybody who's able to join. And if you want to watch this later, more than welcome to send me any questions that you might have. I will try to keep this as brief as possible because that's one of the things that I do not like to waste anyone's time. So today's topic is 3 steps to communicate with clarity, compassion, and power. And at the core of it is communication. So this is one of my favorite subjects and definitely one of the fluffiest one that I've worked on. And I'm going to tell you a little bit why is that and why I like to look at it a little bit different. But before we do that, I wanted to acknowledge everyone who has been engaging lately with some of my posts about being invisible and kind of feeling left out. And if you are one of those people who have experienced something heavy lately, just so you know, it's okay. I know it's hard, and you probably, when you're in the midst of things, it's just so hard to wrap your head around what happened when you're experiencing betrayal, when you're experiencing information that comes as a shock to you. It's just very hard to process it and very hard to go through it. But because I have been through a few events that caused me to feel like I'm in a fog, like I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what I'm doing, I do want to say that there is a reason for it. There is like a bigger plan that you're part of, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And just hang in there and just trust that everything is happening for you. One of my friends recently has reminded me that life is happening for us and not against us. Even though it's hard and it feels like so heartbreaking in the moment, just trust the process and trust that you're going to get to the results that you want, which, by the way, might be more aligned with your values, more aligned with how you are and how you want to live your life. All right, that being said, we're going to talk about communication. So before we do that, let me just see if I can see my slides here. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. For some of you who have been watching me for a while, know that I have been in the business of property management for more than 15 years, probably 17 years for now. I have some background in accounting as well. But I like to study leadership. I wanted to see what moves people. And I look at leadership from a personal perspective too, like kind of that self leadership aspect of it, which sometimes is being left out of this idea of leadership because you're not influencing anyone if you're self leading, which is so wrong. And I'll explain as we go why is that. But what I like to think about for myself, what I do and what I like to do is actually to move people from this overthinking state, from people pleasing and self doubt, into kind of like a more of honoring state, and realizing that leadership really starts within. So you can move and kind of have this change to have calm clarity, confident communication, and a grounded leadership. So let's move forward. Is communication only self-expression? If that is the case, that would mean that it is satisfying enough to say what you feel. Is it? Is not. Definitely not, because communication is clarity transfer. Okay. So I was telling a little bit earlier that communication is one of my favorite subjects, and definitely the biggest chunk and the fluffier subject that I worked on. And I'll tell you why. I moved in the United States in 2007. I naively thought that I will be, operating as I did back in Romania. But I didn't realize that my English language is probably, I mean, it's safe to say it was non-existent. These conversational expressions that you learn in classes, they're not useful. Okay, they're not useful. People talk much faster. In reality, you have to go to maybe integrate yourself in a community, go to work, go to school, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help. So I literally started off from kind of understanding, what is my role if I cannot communicate. And I found out very quickly that you're being forced to live in a secluded, bubble, and just kind of live your life like that, because nobody can understand you. You cannot transmit what you want to say, and it's a little heartbreaking, of course, but it's also a great opportunity to kind of reset what you thought about communication and be like, okay, what can I do here? So it doesn't mean that I learned how to say what I feel. I actually learned to say what I want, right? I didn't want to fall into, creating long explanation or having these meltdowns because I cannot say the words that I want to say. I actually wanted to learn to communicate. And I have done so through the first part of this talk, which is skill, which is a lot of people's focus on these days, meaning what you say. I wanted to understand what I say. And what I say for me, especially at the beginning of this chapter of my life, started with learning the language, what to say it. And then I moved on into kind of researching how do I create a little bit more meaningful connection to people, not just saying what I have to say. And then I learned that it matters how you say it, right? And then later on, when I discovered some more in-depth work, I moved into this idea of communicating with power, which is to say, who you are when you are communicating, which, by the way, shouldn't be different than who you are in everyday life, but it matters who you are at core. So a lot of people focus on this first layer of the skill, what do you say? But when you only focus on that, you are actually creating a words exchange rather than a connection. And what you want to do is actually go more in depth. There's a bunch of common mistakes that are kind of weakening communication, saying too much, stacking multiple points, using vague language, or over-explaining, which all of this only make you feel safe. You're saying more basically to justify yourself, and a lot of people confuse that with better leadership, and it's really not. But most breakdowns start with one thought, and that leads to another thought, that leads to a jumble mumble of thoughts. And that is unclear thinking. For example, if you have received news or that something happened or something is happening to yourself in the professional setting or in a personal life, and this news is really shocking to you and quite unexpected. And it feels like a betrayal. It feels like someone just punched you in the gut. They're like, here you go. What's happening, you tend, if you're not learned, if you haven't learned to regulate yourself, you tend to fall into unclear thinking. Unclear thinking leads to emotional avoidance. You don't know what's happening. You cannot align your thoughts. You don't want to feel the way you feel, and definitely you do not want to communicate from that state. Excuse me. So what's happening here is that you're moving into a reactive state, which if you have watched some of the talks that I have done earlier, we were talking about these low vibration emotions that keep you in reactive mode. And the more you work on yourself and you learn to regulate, you move into positive vibrations, positive emotions, like willingness, like neutral, even neutral. It's you're moving above this area of reactivity. So we're talking about scale from a structure plus timing plus intention stand. Now, this is to be clear. Okay, I'm not sure what happened here, but I think I clicked on the wrong button. My apologies. We were talking about explaining where we're giving context about a situation, which is very okay if you're not over explaining. When you go and you tap into justification, that means you're starting to defend yourself, and that's not something that we want to do. Okay, now clarifying, it's making the outcome unmistakable. This is where actually this idea of leadership leaves, because when you're making the outcome unmistakable, everyone and anyone who hears your instruction can follow through. And that's something that's very valuable in a leadership setting. Um, and moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about three ideas that I'd like to use to make communication effective. By the way, if you're interested in anyone who's very specific about learning the skill of communication, Jefferson Fisher is actually very valuable. He came to Chicago for a book signing last year, I believe, and he's an amazing person. But also, he talks a lot about pausing before you communicate, which is very nice. And here, what I have found very valuable is actually to go through a few steps. The tool number one that I want to talk about, what is your intent? What do I want to move here? The intent might be to, I don't know, to make sure somebody has or knows about a task you're talking about, or you want to achieve something. Nothing happened in any of the businesses or any of the ideas that came to life and have become successful. Nothing happened without communication. And that was, what is my ultimate intention here? What do I want to achieve? I'm very clear on my intent. And number two, I'm going to make this one message rule. We're going to have this one conversation about one core point, and I'm going to let you know exactly what you need to do. And then I'm going to state the outcome. This is where I want to get. So basically, moving someone from point A to point B through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps, whatever. So basically, you're stating the decision, the ownership, and also the timeline that you want to have that done. So usually we are being taught that performance equals output. Typically, that means more effort, more hours, more execution. But really, performance, in my eyes, is the byproduct of how regulated, how clear, and grounded someone is while they're doing their work. So what allows us to perform well is not really pushing harder, but removing this internal friction. So clarity and capacity can actually flow naturally. Number two, compassion. I love this. I love this section of communication because a lot of the times the only thing that we're being thought about speaking with compassion is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that works well to some extent, but oftentimes we don't have the full context or the full comprehension what the other person is going through. So communicating from compassion actually goes a little bit beyond that idea. And I love this quote by Marshall Rosenberg. By the way, he's the author of the book with the same name, Nonviolent Communication. He wrote that the intention is to create the quality of connection for everyone's needs to be met compassionately. Wow, how beautiful. I wish we could use this as a start for every communication training. The intention is to create the quality of connection for everyone needs to be met compassionately. Basically, we are reminding ourselves that we're humans. And what communication here means, and it stays at the base of what is alive in us. Finding what is alive in us. And isn't that beautiful? Isn't that like a beautiful idea? What is alive in you? What do you want to communicate? What is it? What is it that you would like to say? What is it that you would like people to hear? Right? And this means that you are going to learn or tap into empathy. And this is not about being nice, but being emotionally responsible. You're not going to drag your emotional baggage around, but you are going to learn to regulate. Um, and if it happens that your clarity actually collapses when someone reacts, that means that you are outsourcing your regulation. You haven't learned to do that within yourself. So you ideally, clear communication or nonviolent communication will hold ground even when someone is losing their ground, even when someone is slipping into a more aggressive way of communicating. So, what we're doing here is connecting to the humanity in us. That's just absolutely valuable and so crucial in today's world. Um, I think that at some level, conflict arises not only because we haven't said enough words, but because we haven't met our needs. Our needs have not been met. And this can create a little bit of friction, of course, but we do not want to start blaming people. We want to start owning what we can do. And in this case, learning to say what we actually feel that is right, but with the intention to create this connection and make sure both of us are happy about what's happening here. Okay, so even if I say something that you do not like, let's see what we can work out together, so we can make things more pleasant or have like a positive outcome for both of us. There is a powerful distinction when we talk about nonviolent communication. Just the word of a nonviolent communication kind of leads you to believe or to think about aggressiveness in talking. But there are people who are very subtle when they're talking violently. They will use words that will make you feel very diminished in your contributions, dismissed, or if they know something personal about you, they will throw it in there like, yes, you're good at this, but remember that time in 1997 when you did that? That's really not cool to do, but it happens. So what we want to focus on is specifically on this point of sharing compassion, of observing without judgmental, kind of understanding our feelings without accusing everyone else for those feelings. They're ours, we're taking responsibility for it. Kind of understanding our needs, not based on the demands that people have, but based on our own guideline, let's say, and also manage our requests and not the expectations that we have set up, because those expectations oftentimes are not in line with what we what is real. Every person has different way of functioning, and their expectation might be different than ours. Okay, so let's move forward to my one of my favorite steps, which is power. This is actually where we are talking a little bit about the holistic way of communicating. And I have noticed that people don't like to follow polish anymore. We don't want to have this perfect image of someone who's talking everything what we want to hear, who is saying all the right words. They're not coughing in a live video like I just did, and then I clicked end stream instead of going forward. We are following people who we can resonate with, people who are honest enough to be vulnerable and say what they want to say, regardless of the things that are happening in a way. And people respond to presence. And this idea of presence leads me back to one of the focus point of holistic leadership, which I'm such a fan of. Wholeness, the wholeness of a person. So I cannot separate myself in a professional setting from who I am in a personal setting. Meaning it's still me. It's still me as whole and complete imperfect as in any other version. Because of that, sometimes when we're doing our professional trainings, we're trying to separate one aspect of our life from another one. So you learn everything what you have to learn, you learn how to present, you learn how to speak, perfectly, and people don't feel you because you have left part of you aside from what you're doing. That's presence. Presence means you're bringing your whole self, you're connecting, you're doing this, in, I don't know how we say, how should we say it, like, right, integral part of who you are. I think that's sufficient. Integral part of who you are. All of you is here. All of you is present. All of you is talking, right? It's not about saying better words, and it's not about more techniques of approaching things, but it's to stop abandoning yourself while you're speaking. And quite certainly this requires some practice, but I'm very certain that it can be done, and it can be done right. Okay, the real root of communication issues is that it starts before you speak. So what's happening here is, before we even say a word, your body has already decided how it's feeling. And the first thing is, am I safe? Am I bracing? Am I proving? Am I shrinking? Right? Tone is somatic before it becomes verbal. So we often communicate from over responsibility. We tap into hyper awareness. We definitely tend to be fearful of being misunderstood, fear of saying too much, and that is because we haven't regulated our body. We haven't learned to actually read how our body talks. And I'm going to tell you, there's like two completely separate patterns of this. There's on one spectrum is invisibility, and the other one is overfunctioning. I have lived a lot of time in this invisible state. And I think it was safety mechanism, right? My body tried to protect me by staying quiet to avoid judgment, of course, by toning down ideas before they actually land to someone, and waiting to be invited. Well, guess what? A lot of the times invitation doesn't come. There's no one going to invite you if you don't actually take ownership of how you feel and what you want to say. Nothing is going to happen. Maybe you're going to get invited to speak in a meeting, maybe not. And so it's your decision to make that change. Now, I have seen the other side of overfunctioning, where people explaining everything, every single little details. They're fixing ideas and thoughts before anyone is asking them, and carrying on conversation just to avoid tension. It's like, I know I have done something wrong, but I'm just going to keep talking so it's not that obvious. But it doesn't really work that way, right? Both of these ideas, or both of these states, look competent, but neither of them builds authority. And this actually goes into not only in the professional setting, but also in the personal relationships. Because not saying anything means, or somewhat gets translated into an acceptance. So every single behavior is accepted because you are staying quiet, you're not saying anything. And as I said, I know how that feels like, because I've been living in that state for quite a long time, until something happened. I started to speak, what to speak. I learned the language, right? Then I learned to actually add this non-violent way of communicating, which is me, kind of speaking from our humanity, from our aliveness, compassion. And then I moved into powerful talking, which is avoiding exactly this, not falling into any of the traps that you are programmed to believe will keep you safe. Invisibility is one of them, overfunction is one of them. So there might be more between these two, but that's like most prominent that I have seen. So performance over prefers, presence chooses. Okay. When you are choosing to be quiet, and if we go back to this day here, if you're choosing to stay quiet, because it's a choice and it's not a safety mechanism, you're stepping into presence. I am here. Okay, I know how to regulate myself, and I'm choosing to stay quiet. And then performance reacts, right? Let me prove that I deserve to be here. I'm gonna do more, and I'm gonna do it better, and I'm gonna show you what I can do. Okay, so I'm gonna go and make everyone know that I'm worthy. Um, there are a couple of micro practices that you can do before you speak. Um, One of the fastest way to calm your body down, I found that is to step away from whatever situation that's creating tension in your body. So what you can do, you can step away if it's possible, but if not, take 5 minutes and you can do one slow inhale and a slow exhale longer than the inhale. Notice your jaw if if there's tension here. So unclench your jaw, drop your shoulders, not slouching, but like drop it so it's not, they're not tense, and then slow your cadence at least 10%. Like um, try to feel calmer. Okay, in time, this becomes a second nature. Nobody wants to hear you throw a little hissy fit at work or in your private life. Everybody wants to listen to you because you have something valuable to say, and more certainly you are the one that is you own yourself this idea to speak so everybody understand you and everybody can get what you're saying. So after you do this, you can talk, right? So authority increases when you're decreasing urgency. So don't rush into things. If you have time to go over your ideas or to kind of regulate yourself, allow yourself that time. As I said earlier, silence, when silence is chosen, is actually strengthening you, but it can act as a protection. It can act as a punishment. By the way, I have heard something very interesting lately, which I actually believe to be true. It resonated with me so much. So, someone was saying that for example, if there's something in you that believes that you deserve to be spoken a certain way, that if there's something in you that believes that you can or deserve to be punished in a certain way, then you are going to tolerate much more. You're tolerating much more. Once you're starting doing your inner work and you're starting to basically diminish whatever guilt you have inside of you, you are moving into tolerating less of that behavior, if that makes sense. I found that it's just so crucial, right? I'm healing. I'm getting over this guilt. I'm not going to tolerate you screaming at me anymore. Just an example, right? So you can choose which area you're operating from. Protection, right? It's a mechanism of self, as I said, protecting your body. And I think this is learned very early in your childhood, or you're avoiding punishment if you live in a state of guilt. Sometimes we're not even aware that happens. And you can also choose to be silent because you have stepped into your power, because you know how to regulate yourself, and you are choosing to not say anything for whatever reason that might be. What is the difference here? The power of having a choice. We always have a choice on how to talk. Okay, so that is the difference. When it's fear driven, it drains you. It drains you. The silence drains you because you go home and you're gonna go over things in your head. I should have said that. I should have said the other one. I know I could have said better. Said it, said it in different ways. But I think that starting with making sure you understand the difference between these states, kind of working through them, that will help so much. Oh, by the way, I feel like every slide here should require like its own talk. So why do we want to communicate better? Right? Why do we want to communicate better? Because we want to get our message across. So a lot of the trainings that trainings that I have seen teaches a lot of the vocabulary, a lot of the techniques to talk. They even offer scripts, which I'm not doing very good at, as you have seen little hiccups in live streaming. But a lot of the times, all this training ignore this idea of self-trust and regulation and this idea of identity. Am I still me in my integral part if I'm not saying what I say, what I think? Am I still me? That's something that we want to talk about, right? If we are learning this skill, for example, without self trust, we can fall into overthinking, right? If you're doing compassion without any boundaries, creates resentment. Why? Because you are not, some of the values that you have been broken or have been violated, and you haven't created those boundaries to protect yourself, and you create resentment. At the same time, power without regulation can be intimidating, creates this idea of intimidation. And then we have seen this a lot of leaders who are very intimidating because they are making use of their power, their titles, but not in a way that's serving everyone, but in a way that's serving their own ego. And I'm going to speak loud, and I'm going to be sounding very frightening, and you are going to do what I'm telling you to do. And you probably will, because you are dependent. You live in you live in this survival mode, so you can lead into to listening to even that type of behavior. But once you learn to regulate, when you go into this self-trust, once you go into this regulation, you can recognize to yourself the sense of identity and work on that. Okay. Okay, so this idea is like, you do not need to speak louder, you need to speak from alignment. Communication is not about becoming more expressive, but more coherent. I believe we have touched upon this idea of coherence between your brain and your heart. That again, if you want to be an effective communicator, you have to go through the process. You have to learn what to say, right? Because that fixes misunderstandings. You have to learn how you say it, right? Because what that prevents damage. And you have to learn who you are, because that builds trust. I know who I am. I know what I'm talking about, and that creates a connection with whoever resonates with what I'm talking about. So leadership always begins with who you are. It's really the power of your presence is the first thing. And that is because, as I said, first of all, you cannot separate who you are from who you are showing up, right? It's still the same you. And if you, even with an accent, even with hiccups, even with, let's say, a little bit of technical difficulties in saying exactly how people want to hear you, you are still in a good spot, because who you are is someone who can regulate itself, who's recognizing the emotions. And here, when I'm talking about emotions, we're talking about even the emotions that are not serving you, the emotions that are feel a little bit like, I shouldn't really be feeling angry, or I shouldn't be feeling frustrated, right? Because that's not who I am. But that's not who you are. But those are emotions that you have to admit you have, just like everyone else. And it's totally okay. You have to learn to regulate, so you don't expect other people to put up with your overreaction over things that are not so important. So becoming more coherent, it's the key. So, excuse me. I just changed the slide without looking what I'm doing here. So becoming more coherent is the key here. But let's go over this real quick. So we talked a little bit earlier about Jefferson Fisher, who was talking about something very valuable, which is the pause. So take a little pause before you speak, if you have the time. But if not, let's go over, let's see, where's my slide again about here, about what do I want to move here? Okay, what do I want to move here? For example, in this presentation, which is in two parts right now, we are talking about intention, setting your intention before your input. My intention here is to provide 3 tools that will help you communicate with more clarity, more compassion, and more power. And the first tool is intention. What is my intention here? Yeah. And what is your intention? What is your intention? Why is communication such a big chunk of what you're doing? And why is it that you're struggling with it? And why is it the first thing that you need to learn before you move into learning other skills? Just food for thought. The second tool, one message rule. By the way, here, if you are going into a conversation, especially when you're delegating, right? If you're a manager, new manager, you're trying to delegate things and you're putting 20 items on the list, and he's like, here you go, bam. No, let's focus on the first thing. The first thing that's most important thing. This conversation today, it's about bam. That is what it is. One conversation, one core point, just get it done. And the number three is outcome framing. We are gonna get here, right? So we state the decision. We want you to know who's the ownership of that goal or that outcome and the time we wanted to have it done. So really having this idea of communicating with clarity starts with understanding that without recognizing to yourself why you want to say what you want to say, it's really hard. It's really hard to kind of go over any of the technicalities about speaking. And by the way, communication, there's so many tools out there that you can tap into and research. I like to look at it more of a flow, of a process that involves, skill, compassion, and power. So I hope this helps a little bit. If you do have any question, please let me know in the comments or DM me. And I apologize about this little hiccups. So now we have 2 videos live under this event. And I'm going to post the full link on YouTube if you want to watch it there. But if there's any questions, I would like to definitely address it. And I will see you next month with a very interesting topic. I believe we're going to talk about context versus content. I think that's very valuable in professional and personal fields. Alrighty, have a good day, everybody.